3 days after I was discharged from the hospital, I was still wearing a bandage on my head from the fall that had nearly taken my life. Instead of asking if I was okay, my son ripped off his belt, pointed it at me and shouted, "You can't even take care of a dog." Then he lashed me again and again in front of the neighbors, his wife and his little daughter. I never fought back. I simply looked him in the eye and said, "You just hit the man who's still paying for your entire life." This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we dive in, drop a comment. Have you ever had to choose between holding a grudge and offering a second chance? I read your comments more than you think. Some details have been fictionalized for storytelling. What I hope stays with you is the lesson at its heart. I am Lester Bennett, 67 years old, and when the phone rang that Friday morning, the first call from my son in 3 months, I already knew he needed something. 7:30. I'd been awake since 5. The way you are when sleep becomes lighter with age and the bed feels too big. The coffee was already cold in my cup when Griffin's name lit up the screen. "Dad, I need you to watch Max this weekend," he said. Not hello, not how are you. "Lorraine and I are going to Asheville, anniversary trip." He didn't ask, he announced. But I said yes anyway, because that's what you do when your son finally calls after 3 months of silence. You take what you can get. "I can pick him up at noon," I said. "Perfect. Lorraine will have everything ready." I waited for him to ask something. Anything. How I was doing. Whether the autumn was treating me well. If I'd heard from my old friend Curtis lately. But Griffin was already talking about the resort and the dinner reservations and how much Lorraine needed this getaway. He hung up before I could mention the heart checkup I'd had the week before. The cardiologist said my numbers were a little off. Nothing urgent, just something to watch. But Griffin didn't ask, so I didn't tell. It seemed easier that way. I showered and dressed, carefully clean jeans, a button-down shirt I'd ironed the night before for no particular reason. I wanted to look put together. I wanted Griffin to see that I was doing fine on my own, even though Margaret had been gone since May, and the apartment still felt like it was holding its breath. The drive to Matthews took 40 minutes through Charlotte traffic that moved like cold honey. Griffin's house sat in one of those newer subdivisions where every lawn looked painted on and the mailboxes all matched. His black F-150 gleamed in the driveway, freshly washed, with the company logo on the door, Bennett Home Solutions. He'd never added my name to it, even though I'd fronted him the money to start the business 6 years ago. I knocked instead of using the key I still carried. Lorraine opened the door. 36 years old, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing yoga clothes that looked expensive. She'd always been polite to me in that distant way people are when they're performing courtesy, rather than feeling it. "Here's the list," she said, handing me a folded piece of paper without meeting my eyes. "He eats twice a day, morning and evening. Don't give him table scraps no matter how much he begs." Max, the 5-year-old golden retriever, bounded over and pressed his nose into my hand. I scratched behind his ears the way he liked. "Where's Griffin?" I asked. "Loading the car." She glanced toward the garage. "We're leaving in an hour." Then Ivy came running down the stairs, 8 years old, with her mother's dark hair and a smile that reminded me so much of Margaret it hurt. She threw her arms around my waist. "Grandpa." I hugged her back, feeling that familiar ache of loving someone who lives just far enough away that you can't see them whenever you want. "You be good for your babysitter, okay?" I said. She nodded, then whispered, "I miss you." I slipped a $20 bill into her jacket pocket when Lorraine wasn't looking. "Get yourself something nice," I said quietly. Griffin appeared in the hallway carrying a duffel bag. 46 years old, my son with the kind of build that came from physical work and the kind of confidence that came from never having to question whether someone would catch you if you fell. He looked like me at that age, before life and loss had carved lines I couldn't smooth away. "Thanks for doing this, Dad," he said, but his eyes were already on his watch. "We'll be back Sunday night. Late." "Take your time," I said. "Max and I will be fine." He didn't ask about my week. He didn't mention that we hadn't spoken since July. He just handed me Max's leash and a bag of supplies and clapped me on the shoulder like we were colleagues wrapping up a business transaction. I didn't tell him about the heart checkup the week before. It didn't seem important. He didn't ask. Max climbed into my car without hesitation, settling into the passenger seat like he owned it. I rolled down the windows halfway so he could stick his nose out and smell the world passing by. The October air was cool and carried the scent of someone burning leaves a few streets over. On the way home, I stopped at the pet supply store and bought 2 extra bags of dog food. Max only ate one brand, and I told myself I was just being practical, prepared. But when the cashier rang me up and I saw the total $63 for more food than one weekend could possibly require, I felt something shift in my chest. Not pain exactly, more like a warning. I loaded the bags into the trunk next to Max's overnight bed and his favorite toys. My hands felt cold, even though the afternoon sun was warm through the windshield. I realized I hadn't eaten lunch. Hadn't even thought about it. I told myself it was just being prepared. I didn't think about why I needed to prepare for watching a dog I'd watched a dozen times before. I didn't think about the cold hands or the missed meal or the way the cashier had asked twice if I was feeling all right. I drove home with Max asleep on the passenger seat, his breathing steady and trusting, and 2 extra bags of kibble in the trunk that I wouldn't need. The October sun slanted low through the trees, turning everything gold and temporary. My hands felt cold on the steering wheel, but I turned up the heat and told myself it was nothing. Nothing at all. Saturday morning felt ordinary, the kind of ordinary that makes you ignore the small warnings your body tries to send. I woke at 5:30, with Max already watching me from the foot of the bed. The cold feeling in my hands from yesterday had faded, or maybe I'd just gotten used to it. I told myself it was nothing, just the change of seasons, just getting older. We went for our walk while the neighborhood was still quiet, and the October air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. Max pulled at the leash whenever he caught a squirrel scent, and I let him lead me down familiar streets. The sun came up slow and gold through the trees, and I thought about how Margaret used to love autumn mornings like this. She'd been gone 5 months now, and some days I still reached for her side of the bed before I remembered. Back at the apartment, I made oatmeal with brown sugar and coffee strong enough to burn if you weren't careful. Max ate his breakfast in 4 enthusiastic gulps and settled at my feet while I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my phone. No missed calls. No messages. I thought about calling Griffin, asking how the drive to Asheville went, but I didn't. He hadn't called me, and there was something about that silence, 3 months of it before yesterday, and now another full day that had become so normal I didn't even notice it was strange anymore. When did we stop calling each other just to talk? When did we start only reaching out when one of us needed something? I set the phone down and told myself it didn't matter. The morning passed quietly. I washed the dishes. I read 3 chapters of a book about the Revolutionary War. Max dozed in the patch of sunlight that moved across the living room floor, and I watched him sleep and thought about how dogs were better company than most people because they never expected you to be anything other than what you were. Around noon, I stood up to make a sandwich, and the room tilted sideways for a moment. I grabbed the arm of the chair and waited for everything to settle. "Just stood up too fast," I said out loud, though there was nobody there to hear me but Max. "That's all." He lifted his head and looked at me with that concerned expression dogs get when they sense something's wrong. But I waved him off and went to the kitchen anyway. Made myself a turkey sandwich with too much mustard and ate it standing at the counter. How many times had I dismissed what my body was telling me, choosing instead to believe I was fine? The afternoon stretched out long and quiet. I tried to read more but kept losing my place. My hands felt cold again, even though I'd turned the heat up to 72. I thought about the heart checkup the week before. The cardiologist had said my numbers were a little off, said I should watch my salt intake and maybe take it easy. But what did that mean at 67? I already lived easy. I thought about calling Vernon Banks, 73, who'd been my friend since Margaret and I first moved to Charlotte 30 years ago. He'd know what to say. He always did. But it was Saturday afternoon, and he was probably busy with his daughter's family or working in his garden. "I'll call him tomorrow," I said to Max, "just to talk." Max thumped his tail against the floor, but didn't get up from his spot in the sun. The silence of a man living alone is different from the silence of a man who chose to be alone. I hadn't chosen this. Margaret was supposed to be here, and Griffin was supposed to call more than once every 3 months, and life was supposed to look different at 67 than it did. But here I was anyway, sitting in an apartment that was too quiet and too cold, even with the heat turned up, telling a dog about my plans for tomorrow. Dinner was leftover chicken and rice that I ate without tasting, and by the time I finished washing the dishes, it was barely 7 o'clock. But I felt tired in a way that went deeper than just needing sleep. I sat in my chair and tried to watch the news, but the voices on the television sounded far away and unimportant. Max got up from his spot and came over and rested his head on my knee, and I scratched behind his ears. "You're a good boy," I told him. Best company a man could ask for. At 8 o'clock, earlier than I'd gone to bed since I was a child, I turned off the television and the lights and headed for the bedroom. Max followed close at my heels, closer than usual, like he didn't want to let me out of his sight. "Ready for bed, boy?" I asked. "It's early, but I'm tired." He jumped up onto the bed without waiting for permission and curled against my side, warm and solid and real. I pulled the blanket up and felt the weight of him there, and thought about how strange it was that a dog could make a room feel less empty. The apartment was quiet, except for the sound of Max breathing and the occasional car passing outside. I thought about calling Vernon tomorrow, maybe inviting him over for coffee, maybe asking if he wanted to go for a walk in the park like we used to do when Margaret was alive, and the 4 of us would spend Sunday afternoons together. Maybe tomorrow I'd feel more like myself. The last thing I remember before closing my eyes that Saturday night was the weight of Max against my side, and thinking that tomorrow I should probably call Vernon, just to talk, just to hear a friendly voice. I didn't know tomorrow would start very differently than I planned. I didn't know that when I woke up on Sunday morning and stood to reach for my heart medication on the dresser, everything would change. The last thing I saw before the kitchen floor came up to meet me was the bottle of heart medication on the second shelf, just out of reach. Sunday morning, 8 o'clock. I'd woken feeling better than I had in days, which should have been a warning in itself. The cold in my hands had faded, and I'd slept deeper than usual, and I thought maybe whatever had been wrong was passing. Maybe I was fine. I fed Max first, then filled the coffee pot. The medication bottle sat on the second shelf of the kitchen cabinet up at eye level, because I'd read that helped you remember. I reached up, standing on my toes the way I'd done 1,000 times before. That's when the room tilted. Not slowly, just tilted all at once, like someone had picked up one corner of the world and dropped it. "Wait," I said out loud to no one. My hand caught the counter edge, but my fingers wouldn't grip, and then I was falling backward, and the white tile floor was rushing up, and the last coherent thought I had was that I should have told Griffin about the checkup, about the medication, about the numbers the cardiologist said were off. Then, nothing. Max started barking immediately. Not his excited bark or his playful bark, a different bark. Continuous, frantic, the kind that meant something was wrong and he didn't know how to fix it. I know this because the paramedics told me later. In the moment, I knew nothing. Just darkness and cold and the distant sound of something that might have been my own breathing. 8 hours is a long time to lie unconscious on a cold floor. When you're 67 and your heart has already given you one warning. The morning light through the kitchen window turned to afternoon sun. The coffee pot beeped when the brew finished, then went silent, then grew cold. Max's water bowl sat empty across the room. The medication bottle remained on the second shelf, close enough to see, too far to reach. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, fully charged, volume up, the way I always kept it in case Griffin called. It never rang. Not once in 8 hours. Not to ask how the weekend with Max was going. Not to check if everything was all right. Not even to confirm what time they'd pick up the dog Sunday evening. The phone just sat there, silent and useless, while I lay 3 feet away on the tile with a gash on my temple where I'd struck the cabinet corner on the way down. Max never stopped barking, but the apartment had thick walls, the kind they built in the 70s when people cared more about privacy than community, and none of the neighbors heard, or if they heard, they didn't think it unusual enough to check. Except Max never barked like that, not for hours without stopping. Wren Cooper, 11 years old, from 2 doors down, was looking for a softball in the courtyard when she heard him. She told me later she'd been searching through the bushes when she realized the barking hadn't stopped once, not for a breath. She said it sounded wrong. There was an old wooden chair someone had left in the yard, and she dragged it to my kitchen window and climbed up to look inside. The paramedics told me this part later because I wasn't conscious to see it. How she'd cupped her hands against the glass to block the sun. How she'd gone perfectly still when she saw me on the floor. How she'd climbed down and pulled out her phone and called 911 without calling her mother first, without screaming, without wasting a single second. The emergency dispatcher's voice came through calm and professional, trained to handle calls from frightened children. 911, what's your emergency? There's an old man on the floor, and he's not moving, Wren said, steady as stone. I think he needs help right now. What's your location, sweetheart? Wren gave my address without hesitation, told them which apartment, told them the back door would be unlocked. Is he breathing? I don't know. But his dog won't stop barking, and there's blood on the floor near his head. Help is on the way. Can you stay on the line with me? Yes, ma'am. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. Wren was still on the phone when they pulled into the parking lot. She met them at my door and showed them where I was, then stepped back. The lead paramedic, a woman in her 40s with efficient movements and kind eyes, checked my pulse first, then my pupils, then the gash on my head that had stopped bleeding hours ago but left a dark stain on the white tile. She called out numbers to her partner: systolic, diastolic, heart rate, oxygen saturation. Then she picked up my phone from the counter and checked the call log. No incoming calls logged during the past 8 hours, she said to her partner. Not one. I learned all of this later, in pieces, from different people who were there when I wasn't. But what I understood immediately, what hit me the moment I woke up in the ambulance with an oxygen mask on my face and the world bouncing beneath me, was this: a stranger saved my life. My son never called. 8 hours I had been lying on that floor. 8 hours while Griffin was wherever he was, doing whatever he was doing, never once thinking to check on his father. Never once wondering if the man watching his dog might need something. A girl I had known for less than 10 minutes had done what my own son couldn't be bothered to do. She had noticed I was missing. She had cared enough to look. 8 hours. My son's number never appeared on the paramedic's incoming call log. Not once. An 11-year-old stranger saved my life, while my son spent Sunday wherever he was, never thinking to check on his father. The doctor told me if the girl had found me 30 minutes later, I would have died on that kitchen floor. Dr. Reeves, the attending cardiologist in his 50s, delivered the prognosis with practiced directness, tempered by genuine concern. He sat on the edge of my hospital bed Monday morning and showed me the scan results I couldn't fully understand. Chambers and valves and percentages that added up to a simple truth. If she'd been 30 minutes later, Mr. Bennett, he said, tapping the chart, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I stayed at Carolina's Medical Center 3 days, long enough to understand that the fall had been a symptom, not the problem. Long enough to learn a new vocabulary of medications and restrictions. Long enough to notice who visited and who didn't. Griffin never called. Not Sunday night when they admitted me. Not Monday when they moved me from ICU to a regular room. Not Tuesday when the nurses started asking about family, and I told them my son was probably busy. Vernon Banks, 73. My best friend and former partner at the supply company arrived on the second day with sandwiches from our old favorite shop. He didn't call first. He just showed up at 2 in the afternoon and set a paper bag on the tray table beside my bed.
"Brought you a sandwich," he said. "From Moretti's. Extra mustard."
He didn't ask how I was feeling or what the doctors said. He just pulled up the visitor's chair and sat down and unwrapped his own sandwich and ate it while we watched the news on the television mounted to the wall. Sometimes the best kind of company is the kind that doesn't require you to perform gratitude or explain yourself. After 20 minutes, he wadded up the sandwich wrapper and tossed it in the trash.
"Need anything before I go?" he asked.
"No, thank you for coming." He nodded and stood and put one hand on my shoulder for just a moment before he left. How do you tell a nurse asking about family that your only son doesn't know you almost died? Rin came on the third day with her mother. Carol Cooper, 42, had the kind face of a woman who'd raised a child with enough confidence to call 911 when it mattered. She held a crayon drawing that Rin had made me and Max sitting in a garden, surrounded by flowers that were anatomically impossible, but emotionally perfect. "I drew you and Max," Rin said, holding it up so I could see. "In a garden, because you'll be okay." "It's beautiful," I told her. And I meant it. Carol set it on the nightstand beside the get well card the hospital staff had signed. "Thank you," Carol said quietly, "for having such a good dog. If Max hadn't been barking..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "I should be thanking her," I said, nodding toward Ren. "She saved my life." Ren looked at her shoes, suddenly shy now that the emergency was over, and she was just a girl in a hospital room with an old man she barely knew. They stayed 10 minutes, long enough to be kind, short enough not to tire me out. When they left, I looked at the drawing for a long time, at the careful way Ren had drawn Max's ears, at the yellow sun in the corner, at the stick figure version of myself, standing upright and whole. My phone sat on the nightstand beside it, fully charged. No missed calls. The nurses asked about discharge plans, who would pick me up, whether I had someone at home to help for the first few days. I told them I'd arrange something, and I called Vernon from the hospital phone because I didn't want to use my cell and see the empty call log again. "I'll be there Wednesday," Vernon said when I asked. "What time?" "Noon. I'll be there at 11:30. Wednesday afternoon, Vernon pulled up to the hospital entrance in his old Buick that smelled like coffee and wore its age better than most people did. A nurse wheeled me out in a wheelchair I didn't think I needed, and Vernon took my elbow while I stood and settled into the passenger seat. He'd brought a cane, wooden with a curved handle. "For the next couple weeks," he said, setting it between us, "doctor's orders." We drove in silence for 5 minutes before he spoke again. "Did he call?" I looked out the window at Charlotte, passing by familiar streets, familiar buildings, a city that looked exactly the same as it had 4 days ago, even though everything felt different. "No," I said. Vernon nodded once. Didn't ask any follow-up questions. Didn't offer any explanations or excuses. Just drove. The silence between us was the comfortable kind. The kind that comes from 30 years of friendship and doesn't require filling. We'd started the supply company together, back when both our wives were alive and our children were young, and the future seemed like something we had control over. He'd sold me his half when he retired 5 years ago, and I'd sold the whole thing 2 years after that, when Margaret got sick and I couldn't manage it alone anymore. He understood things without needing them explained. That's worth more than most people realize. When we pulled into my apartment complex, he came around and opened my door and handed me the cane and walked beside me to the building entrance. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said at the gate. "Check on you and Max." "You don't have to." "I know." Max greeted me at the apartment door like I'd been gone for years instead of days. He pressed against my legs and made small worried sounds, and followed me from room to room while I walked through the space, slowly relearning how to navigate it with the cane in one hand. The apartment smelled clean. Someone had done the dishes and taken out the trash, and opened the windows to air everything out. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, looking at the exact spot on the floor where they had found me. The white tile gleamed in the afternoon light. Someone had scrubbed it, probably Vernon. The blood stain was gone, but the memory of lying there for 8 hours while my phone never rang, that stayed. Griffin still hadn't called. The spot on the floor was clean. Vernon had scrubbed away the blood, but he couldn't scrub away the absence. Curtis Hayes called me Saturday morning, 3 days after I came home from the hospital. And I could tell from his voice he'd seen something that troubled him. "I saw you yesterday," Curtis said without preamble. "At Griffin's. You were on a cane." Curtis Hayes, 70, the neighbor who lived next door to Griffin, in that Matthews subdivision where the lawns all looked the same. I'd met him a handful of times over the years, at family gatherings, cookouts, and birthday parties, back when Margaret was alive, and we still pretended we were the kind of family that gathered for cookouts and birthday parties. "Yeah," I said. "I had a fall last Sunday." A fall. His tone made it clear he wanted more than that. So I told him. The kitchen floor. The 8 hours. The girl from 2 doors down. The 3 days in the hospital. I kept my voice even, factual, like I was describing something that had happened to someone else. "Jesus," Curtis said quietly when I finished. "Does Griffin know? He was standing right there yesterday when I returned Max. He saw the bandage." A long silence on the other end of the line. "And he didn't ask." "He asked about the dog." Another silence, longer this time. "What did he ask about the dog?" "Whether I'd fed him on schedule. Whether I'd walked him enough." I heard Curtis take a breath like he was about to say something, then stop. Sometimes the silence says more than words ever could. "I'm coming by this afternoon," he finally said. "Around 2. That all right?" "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'll see you at 2. He hung up before I could argue. Saying it out loud to Curtis made it real, in a way that thinking it alone hadn't. My son knew I'd almost died. And he didn't care. At 1:30, I realized I'd left my house keys at Griffin's place. They'd been in my jacket pocket when I brought Max back Friday, and I must have set them down on the entryway table when I was fumbling with the leash. I needed those keys. Only had the one set. I drove to Matthews slowly, the cane propped against the passenger seat, and pulled up to Griffin's house just after 2. His F-150 sat in the driveway, freshly washed, again, gleaming black in the October sun. Griffin was in the front yard talking to someone from across the street, a man in golf clothes, holding a rake he wasn't using. I recognized him from previous visits, but couldn't remember his name. When Griffin saw me getting out of the car with the cane, his face didn't shift to concern. It shifted to annoyance. I walked across the lawn, each step careful, because I still didn't fully trust my balance. "I think I left my keys here yesterday," I said. "On the entry table." Griffin stared at me for a moment, then turned back to his neighbor. "This is what I'm dealing with," he said loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Can't even keep track of his own keys." The neighbor shifted uncomfortably, glanced at me, looked away. Griffin's voice got louder. "You know Max came back thin. I swear he's lost weight. And the house. Jesus, Dad, the house was a mess when I picked him up. You can't even take care of a dog properly anymore." I stood there with the cane in one hand and let him talk. The bandage on my head itched in the afternoon heat, but I didn't reach up to adjust it. "I don't know why I asked you to watch him in the first place," Griffin continued, his voice climbing. "You don't know how to do anything right anymore." More neighbors had appeared. A woman getting her mail 2 houses down, a teenager washing a car across the street. They weren't even pretending not to watch now. Curtis stepped into the yard from the sidewalk. He must have been walking over to my apartment when he saw my car. Lorraine appeared in the doorway, but didn't come outside. Ivy stood behind her, small and quiet. Down at the end of the street, I saw Wren on her bicycle. She'd stopped pedaling, just standing there with one foot on the ground, watching. Griffin was still talking, his hands gesturing wildly now, his voice carrying across the perfect lawns and matching mailboxes. "You couldn't handle the business. You couldn't handle Mom when she got sick. You can't handle a simple weekend with a dog." "Griffin," Curtis said quietly from the edge of the yard. Griffin whipped around to face him. "This is a family matter, Curtis." "I can see that," Curtis said, but he didn't move. I stood perfectly still. The October air smelled like cut grass and someone's dryer sheets. The sun was warm on my shoulders. Everything felt very clear and very slow. Like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air gets heavy and you know exactly what's coming, but you can't do anything to stop it. He had seen the bandage on my head. He just didn't care enough to ask. Griffin turned back to me, and his face had changed. Not angry anymore. Something colder than that. Something that made the neighbors who were watching take a small step back, even though they were already 20 feet away. "You've been disrespecting me for years," he said, quieter now, which was somehow worse than the yelling. "Making me look bad, making people think I don't take care of my own father." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. We both knew who had been taking care of whom. "You embarrass me," Griffin said, standing there with that cane like you're some kind of victim. Like I'm supposed to feel sorry for you. His hands moved to his waist, to his belt buckle. I'd seen him do this before, years ago when Margaret was alive and Ivy was younger, and he'd lost his temper over something small, a toy left out, a glass of juice spilled on the carpet. Margaret had stopped him then, put herself between Griffin and whatever he was angry at, and said his name in that tone that meant, "No, not in this house, not ever." But Margaret was gone, and I was standing in his front yard with half the neighborhood watching. And I could see in his eyes that he'd made a decision. He hadn't touched me yet, but the way he was looking at me, the way his hands were moving toward his belt, I knew that was about to change. And I knew I wasn't going to stop it. Not because I couldn't, because I needed everyone watching to see exactly who my son was. Griffin took off his leather belt in front of 8 people, and not one of them thought he would actually use it on his father. I watched him slide it through the loops, the worn brown leather making that familiar sound, the whisper of something pulled free that was meant to hold things together. He'd worn that belt every day for years. Margaret had given it to him for his 30th birthday, back when we still believed he'd grow into the kind of man who deserved gifts like that. The yard went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop. "Griffin," Lorraine said from the doorway, but her voice was small and she didn't move forward. He folded the belt in half. The sound of leather against leather cracked across the quiet like a warning shot. I stood perfectly still, the cane in my right hand, the bandage on my head from where I'd fallen 6 days ago while my son was eating room service in the mountains and never called to check on me. Not once. The first strike caught me across the left shoulder. It burned. That's what people don't tell you about being hit. It burns before it aches. Like touching something hot, and your body needs a moment to understand what just happened before it can hurt properly. I didn't move. Didn't raise my hands to block. Didn't step back. The second strike came across my back. Someone gasped. One of the neighbors, I couldn't tell who. The third strike. The fourth. I kept my eyes on Griffin's face. Watched the way his jaw was set, and his breathing had changed, and his eyes had gone somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't reach him even if I wanted to. He had hit me before with words. This was just honest. Curtis moved first, rushed forward from the edge of the yard with his hands out like he was approaching a dangerous animal. "Griffin, stop this right now." Griffin turned, still holding the belt, and shoved Curtis hard with his free hand. Curtis went down on the grass, 70 years old, and suddenly on the ground because he'd tried to stop a man from beating his father in a suburban front yard on a Saturday afternoon. That's when Ivy came running out of the house.
"Grandpa!"
Her voice was high and broken.
"Daddy, stop hurting Grandpa!"
Lorraine caught her daughter by the shoulders and pulled her back toward the doorway. But Ivy was crying, now, loud, desperate sobs that echoed off the matching houses and perfect lawns. Griffin turned back to me, raised the belt again. I counted 6 more strikes before he stopped. Across my shoulders, my back, once across my arms, when I shifted my weight because the cane wasn't quite steady. Each one burning, and then aching, and then joining the others into one continuous pain that felt almost like being erased.
Down at the end of the street, Wren was still on her bicycle, still watching. Her phone was out now, recording probably. Good.
Griffin finally lowered the belt. He was breathing hard, his face flushed, his shirt collar dark with sweat. The neighbors stood frozen in their driveways and doorways, watching but not moving, witnessing but not intervening.
I straightened slowly. My back screamed, but I kept my face neutral. The cane helped me balance.
The bandage on my head felt tight and hot.
Griffin was still staring at me, waiting for something. An apology maybe, or tears, or some acknowledgement that he'd won whatever he thought we were fighting about.
I looked at him for a long moment. At this man I'd raised, this man I'd lent money to when his business was failing. This man whose mortgage I'd been paying for 6 years while he drove his F-150 with the company logo I'd paid to have painted on the door.
I had waited 67 years to understand that love without boundaries isn't love. It's cowardice. You just hit the only person still paying for your life, I said. My voice came out flat and cold. Not angry, not hurt, just factual.
The yard went silent again. Different this time. The kind of silence that comes after someone says something that can't be unsaid. Griffin's face changed. The flush faded. His mouth opened like he was going to argue or deny or demand an explanation.
But I was already turning away.
Curtis was sitting up on the grass now, one hand on his hip where he'd landed. I wanted to help him, but I knew if I bent down, I might not get back up. One of the other neighbors, the man in the golf clothes, moved toward him instead. I walked to my car, each step deliberate, the cane tapping against the concrete driveway, my shoulders and back on fire. But I kept my spine straight and my head up. Behind me I heard Ivy still crying, heard Lorraine's voice trying to soothe her, heard Griffin say something I didn't bother trying to understand. I got into my car and set the cane on the passenger seat, started the engine, put it in reverse. Griffin was standing in the middle of the yard now, the belt still in his hand, looking at me through the windshield like he was trying to figure out what had just happened. Like he'd expected this to go differently. Like maybe I was supposed to apologize, or beg, or promise to do better. I didn't look in the rearview mirror when I drove away. I already knew what I would see. My son, standing in his driveway, holding the weapon he'd used on his father. My granddaughter, crying in the doorway. My neighbor on the ground because he'd tried to help. And 8 witnesses who now knew the truth.
Griffin's entire life, the house, the truck, the business, the family vacation to Asheville, was built on money from the man he'd just beaten in his front yard. The secret was out now. Everyone had heard it. I drove toward Vernon's house on the other side of Charlotte, my hands steady on the wheel, even though my back felt like it was splitting open. The October sun was starting to set, turning everything gold and orange, and I thought about how strange it was that the world could look so beautiful on the day you finally stopped pretending. I drove to Vernon's house that evening and knocked on his door, without calling first, because I needed someone who wouldn't ask questions. Vernon opened the door and looked at my face for 3 seconds. That's all it took. He stepped aside to let me in and went straight to the kitchen to boil water for tea. Didn't ask if I wanted any. Didn't ask what happened or why I was there. Just filled the kettle and set it on the stove, and got down 2 mugs from the cabinet. His house smelled like wood polish and old books, the way houses do when someone lives alone and keeps things tidy out of habit rather than expectation. The lamps were on, even though it wasn't quite dark yet, casting warm yellow light across furniture that had been in the same places for 20 years. We sat at his kitchen table and waited for the water to boil. Vernon poured the tea when it was ready, black tea, strong. The kind that tastes like comfort if you grew up drinking it. He set 1 mug in front of me and kept the other for himself. And we sat there in silence for a long time. Finally, I told him everything. The belt, the neighbors watching, Ivy crying, Curtis on the ground, the words I'd said that couldn't be unsaid. Vernon listened without interrupting. Didn't gasp or shake his head or offer any of those meaningless sounds people make when they don't know what to say but feel like silence is rude. He just listened and drank his tea and kept his eyes on mine, so I knew he was hearing every word. When I finished, he was quiet for another long moment. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked. I looked down at my teacup. The surface was still dark, showing my reflection distorted in the curve of the ceramic. "I'm going to stop catching him," I said. Vernon nodded once, poured more tea even though my cup was still half full. No words needed. I drove home that night with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not revenge, just the quiet, final understanding that the kindest thing I could do now was stop. Sunday morning, I woke early and went to the small office I kept in the second bedroom of my apartment. The safe sat in the closet behind a box of Margaret's things I still hadn't sorted through. I'd bought it 6 years ago, when the business arrangements with Griffin got complicated enough to require documentation. The combination was Margaret's birthday. I opened it and pulled out the folder labeled Griffin Bennett Business Guarantee in my own handwriting. Inside were 6 years of paperwork. The original personal guarantee I'd signed when Griffin needed capital to start the renovation company. $850,000. The renewals I'd signed every year since. The letters from the bank confirming the line was in good standing. The quarterly statements showing exactly how much Griffin had drawn and how close he was to the limit at any given time. Currently, he was at $793,000 of that $850,000 limit. 93% of the line I was personally on the hook for if his business failed. I sat down at the desk and opened my phone, found Desmond Lancaster's number in my contacts, and called even though it was Sunday morning, and most 60-year-old attorneys don't answer their phones before 9. Desmond Lancaster, the attorney who had helped me structure the entire financial guarantee 6 years ago, answered on the second ring. "Lester," he said, "everything all right? I need to withdraw my personal guarantee on Griffin's line of credit." Silence on the other end. Not the comfortable kind Vernon had offered, the kind that means someone is calculating the implications of what you just said. "Are you sure about this, Lester?" Desmond's voice was careful. "This will trigger an event of default. The bank will freeze the line immediately. Griffin won't be able to draw any more funds, and they'll likely call the outstanding balance due within 30 days. "I know." "Have you talked to Griffin about this?" "No." Another pause. "Lester, I have to tell you, this is going to cause significant financial distress for his business. He's been using that line to manage cash flow, pay suppliers, cover payroll when receivables are slow. Without it—" "I know," I said again. "How quickly can you send the notice?" Desmond was quiet for a moment longer. "I can send it today. The bank will process it first thing Monday morning. The line will be frozen by Wednesday at the latest, probably sooner." "Good. Lester, you're allowed to do this. You have every legal right to withdraw your guarantee. I just want to make sure you understand the consequences." "The bank will freeze the line within 3 to 5 business days," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Griffin's business will lose access to $793,000 in working capital. He'll have to find alternative financing or restructure his entire operation." "I understand." "All right," Desmond said. "I'll draft the notice this morning and send it to the bank before noon. You'll get a copy by email." "Thank you." After I hung up, I sat at the desk for a long time, looking at the folder in front of me. 6 years of holding up the floor so he wouldn't fall through. Now I was stepping aside to let him learn what ground feels like. The first guarantee was dated October 2017. Griffin had been 39 then, full of plans and confidence and certainty that this business would make him independent, make him successful on his own terms. He'd shown me the business plan and the market research and asked me to believe in him. And I had. That was the problem. I'd kept believing long after he'd stopped being worth the belief. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the other folder, the one with the automatic payment confirmations. Monthly transfer to the household account that paid for Griffin's mortgage. Quarterly payment for Lorraine's health insurance. The car lease on the F-150. All set up 6 years ago when Griffin said he just needed help getting started. Just until the business stabilized.
just until he got on his feet. I closed both folders and put them back in the safe. When I shut the heavy door and spun the combination lock, it felt like sealing something that had been open too long. I wouldn't need those folders anymore. The bank would handle the rest. Sunday afternoon, I opened my laptop and logged into my banking portal to begin severing the invisible threads that had held my son's life together. The automatic payment list was longer than I remembered. I'd set most of them up years ago and then stopped looking at the monthly confirmations. Just let them run in the background, like utilities, like breathing. The truck lease insurance came first. $420 a month, so Griffin could drive around Charlotte with his company logo on the door of a vehicle he thought he owned. I clicked the cancellation button, and a pop-up asked if I was sure. I clicked confirm. Next was the household account. $800 a month transferred automatically to the joint checking account Griffin shared with Lorraine. Mortgage, utilities, groceries. I'd started it 6 years ago when Griffin said the business cash flow was unpredictable. Just until things stabilized, he'd said. Just until he got his feet under him. I clicked confirm. The family health insurance was $250 a month, covered all three of them. Griffin, Lorraine, Ivy. Better plan than what Griffin's small business could get on its own. I'd added them to my retiree benefits when Griffin said the premiums through his company were too expensive. I clicked confirm. There was a monthly transfer labeled simply Griffin, $500, that showed up in his personal account on the first of every month. He'd called them loans 6 years ago, then 4 years ago, then 2 years ago. Eventually, he stopped calling them anything, and I stopped asking when he planned to pay them back. I clicked confirm. Each click removed another invisible crutch. I had spent 6 years making his life easier. Now I was stepping aside to let him stand alone. The last one surprised me. I'd forgotten about it entirely. Grocery delivery service. $180 a month charged to my card, delivered to Griffin's address. I'd set it up 4 years ago when Lorraine mentioned in passing that she wished they could afford the convenience, but it wasn't in their budget. 4 years of Tuesday dinners showing up at their door. Fresh produce and good cuts of meat, and the kind of bread you can't get at the regular grocery store. She'd never asked where it came from. Griffin had probably told her it was a perk from one of his vendors or something his business provided. Not that his father was quietly paying for their food. I clicked confirm. When I closed the laptop, the apartment felt very quiet. The October sun was setting outside my window, turning the sky that particular shade of orange that Margaret used to love. I sat there in the dimming light and thought about all the things I'd done to keep Griffin from falling. All the nets I'd strung up beneath him so he'd never have to learn what the ground felt like. Monday morning, I drove to Desmond's office in uptown Charlotte. 8th floor of one of those glass buildings that reflected the sky so perfectly you couldn't tell where the city ended and the clouds began. Desmond's assistant brought me coffee I didn't drink and showed me to a conference room with a long polished table and windows overlooking the city. Desmond came in carrying a leather folder that looked expensive and probably was. "I have the withdrawal notice ready for your signature," he said, setting the folder on the table between us. "Once you sign, I'll file it electronically with the bank. They'll process it within 1 business day." He opened the folder and slid the document across to me. Standard legal language about withdrawal of personal guarantee and release of obligation. My name typed at the bottom with a line for my signature. I picked up the pen Desmond offered. Then he slid a second piece of paper across the table. "Before you sign," he said quietly, "there's something you should see." It was a promissory note, $47,000. Griffin's signature at the bottom, dated 6 months ago. The lender was Turner Building Supply, one of the major materials suppliers in Charlotte. I read it twice. "How long have you known about this?" I asked. 3 weeks, Desmond said. "Turner's attorney is a colleague. He mentioned it over lunch when we were discussing commercial debt collection. I didn't realize it was your Griffin until he said the name." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was waiting for the right time." Desmond folded his hands on the table. Turner loaned Griffin the money because Griffin claimed he had an $850,000 line of credit as a backstop. He didn't tell them you were the guarantor, just that the line existed. They're getting nervous because Griffin's been late on 3 payments already. I set the note down on the table and looked at it. $47,000, borrowed 6 months ago. The belt incident had been 2 days ago. The fall on my kitchen floor had been 8 days ago. The pieces were starting to line up in a way that made terrible sense.
What was the money for? I asked, though I thought I already knew. Gambling debt. Of course. The missing piece that explained the desperate anger, the constant need for more. The promissory note doesn't specify, Desmond said carefully. But Turner's attorney mentioned that Griffin told them it was to cover previous supplier debts that had gone to collections, which may or may not be true. I folded the note and handed it back to Desmond. It doesn't change anything, I said. It just explains everything. Desmond took the paper and set it aside. He didn't argue, didn't try to talk me out of what I was about to do, just waited while I picked up the pen again and signed my name at the bottom of the withdrawal notice. The signature felt final, permanent, like signing divorce papers or a will or any other document that marks the end of something you can't undo. I'll file this with the bank today, Desmond said, taking the signed notice and placing it back in the leather folder. The line will be frozen by Wednesday morning at the latest. Griffin will get a notification from the bank explaining that the guarantor has withdrawn support and the facility is no longer available. Will they call the outstanding balance due immediately? Within 30 days, standard procedure. I stood up from the conference room table. The city spread out below us through the windows. Charlotte, on a Monday morning. Everyone going about their business, unaware that somewhere in Matthews, a man's entire financial structure was about to collapse. $47,000 in gambling debt, on top of everything else. It didn't change my decision. It just showed me I was right to make it. I wasn't there when the flatbed truck arrived at Griffin's office Friday morning, but Curtis drove past and called me that afternoon to tell me what he'd seen. Friday, 3 business days after Desmond filed the withdrawal notice. The bank had processed it Wednesday, frozen the credit line by afternoon. I'd gotten the confirmation email at 2:15. Curtis said Griffin had been standing in the parking lot with coffee, talking to 2 employees about something routine. The industrial park where he leased space was the kind of place small contractors kept offices. Nothing fancy, but professional enough. 2 men from the repossession company arrived in a flatbed truck, professional and efficient, carrying clipboards and default notices. They walked straight to the F-150 Griffin had parked in the spot marked owner. He'd waxed it the day before. The truck was gleaming in the October sun. "Are you Griffin Bennett?" one of the repo men asked. "Yes. What's this about?" "We're here to repossess this vehicle." Curtis said Griffin's face went blank. "There must be some mistake. I'm current on all my payments." "Not according to the lender." The man handed him a folded paper. Default notice. Griffin opened it, read it once, then again. Curtis was stopped at the light across the street. He said he could see Griffin's lips moving, reading the words. Guarantor Lester Bennett. Withdrawn. The F-150 went up on the flatbed while Griffin stood holding that paper. His employees watched from the office window. The repo crew finished their job and drove away. Curtis told me Griffin stood in that parking lot for 10 minutes. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. He just stood there holding that paper, Curtis said, not moving, like a man learning the ground wasn't solid. I thanked Curtis and hung up. Sat in my apartment looking out at the October afternoon and thought about how strange it was that you could dismantle someone's life with a few signatures. Monday morning, the corporate card got declined. I learned this from Vernon, who heard it from someone at Griffin's materials supplier, small business community in Charlotte. Word travels. The accounting employee who had worked with Griffin for 4 years made the call to the bank. Asked why a routine lumber order had been rejected, the bank representative told her the line of credit had been frozen. Event of default triggered by guarantor withdrawal. What guarantor? The employee asked. The bank explained. The credit line Griffin used to manage cash flow had been backed by a personal guarantee.
That guarantee had been withdrawn October 23rd.
The employee told Griffin the corporate account was frozen. Griffin called the bank himself, got transferred 3 times before reaching someone who could explain it.
The line had been contingent on a personal guarantee from Lester Bennett. The guarantor had withdrawn support. The bank had frozen the facility pending repayment of outstanding balance.
How much is outstanding? Griffin asked. $793,000. When is it due?
30 days from notice. November 23rd. Griffin hung up and sat very still at his desk. Tuesday, the materials supplier called. Turner Building Supply, the same company that had loaned Griffin $47,000 6 months ago for gambling debts disguised as supplier payments. They were calling to inform him that all deliveries were on hold. The guaranteed account was no longer valid. They'd need payment in full before releasing any more materials. There must be some mistake, Griffin said. No mistake, the supplier said. Your credit line was backed by a guarantor. That guarantee's been withdrawn. We can't extend you credit without it. Griffin was quiet for a moment. Who was the guarantor? He asked. The supplier probably checked his records, probably pulled up the original credit application from 6 years ago. Lester Bennett, the supplier said. Your father. He had been paying his bills, making his calls, running his company. And underneath all of it, his father had been quietly holding the floor up so he wouldn't fall through. The accounting employee told Vernon's friend that Griffin sat in his office chair after that call and didn't move for an hour. Just sat there, looking at the wall where he'd hung the framed photo of the company logo he thought he'd built himself. Bennett Home Solutions, the business he'd started with money his father lent him, the truck his father guaranteed, the credit line his father backed, the insurance his father paid, the mortgage his father covered, the groceries his father sent. 6 years. 6 years of thinking he was succeeding on his own. 6 years of looking down on the old man who didn't understand modern business. 6 years of short calls and long silences and casual cruelty delivered with the confidence of someone who thought they'd earned the right to it. And every single day, his father had been holding the whole thing up while Griffin walked across the top like it was solid ground. The accounting employee left work early Tuesday, told the receptionist she wasn't feeling well. But Vernon's friend said she looked more disgusted than sick, like she'd discovered something that made her not want to be in that building anymore. He had been running a company for 6 years. He had been making decisions, signing contracts, building what he thought was his own empire. And every single day, without knowing it, he had been standing on his father's shoulders, while treating him like something to scrape off his shoe. I wasn't there when any of it happened, but I could picture it clearly. Griffin sitting in that office, the company logo on the wall, the empty parking space where his truck used to be, the frozen credit line, the halted deliveries, the truth settling over him like ash. Everything he thought he'd built, everything he thought he was, gone. The resignation letter was waiting on Griffin's desk Wednesday morning, placed there before he arrived, the office already feeling emptier. I learned about it Thursday from Vernon, who heard about it from Curtis, who'd talked to someone who worked in the same industrial park. Information travels fast in small business circles, especially when it involves someone's world falling apart in real time. Sarah Blake, the accounting employee who had worked with Griffin for 4 years, saw the truth in the ledgers and couldn't unsee it. She'd been the one to call the bank Monday morning, the one who learned about the guarantee and the withdrawal, the one who understood, probably before Griffin did, exactly what had been holding the company together. Her letter was typed, professional, brief. Vernon's friend showed him a photo someone had taken before Griffin threw it away. It read, "I've reviewed the company accounts thoroughly. I know where the money was coming from. I cannot work for a company built on someone else's sacrifice and call it my own career. Effective immediately." Her desk was already cleared when Griffin arrived Wednesday morning. The coffee mug with her daughter's name on it, the framed photo of her husband, the small succulent plant she'd kept alive for 3 years. All of it gone. She'd come in early, packed her things, left the letter in the center of his desk where he couldn't miss it, and walked out without saying goodbye to anyone. She had worked for him for 4 years. She left
in 4 minutes.
Griffin spent Wednesday trying to figure out how to process payroll without an accountant, and whether he could afford to hire a replacement he couldn't pay. The corporate card was still frozen. The credit line was still dead. The truck was still gone. I sat in my apartment Wednesday afternoon and thought about Sarah Blake, who I'd never met walking out of that office, because she'd seen the numbers and understood what they meant. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to be complicit in their delusions. Thursday, the video went up. Carol Cooper Wren's mother posted it to the Maplewood Heights Community Facebook group, the neighborhood association page where people usually complained about lawn care and solicited recommendations for plumbers. The post was simple, no long explanation, just, "This happened Saturday in our neighborhood. The man being hit is 67 years old. He was just released from the hospital 3 days before this." The video was 1 minute and 43 seconds long. Wren had filmed it from the end of the street on her bicycle. You could see everything. Griffin taking off the belt, the first strike, Curtis trying to intervene and being shoved to the ground, Ivy running out crying, the strikes continuing while neighbors watched. And at the end, clear as day, my voice. "You just hit the only person still paying for your life." 12 hours later, it had 3,400 views and 847 comments. I know, because Vernon called me Thursday night and told me. "You've seen the video?" he asked. "What video?" "It's online. Everyone's seen it. The belt incident." I sat down in my kitchen chair, the same chair I'd been sitting in when I decided to call Desmond about the guarantee withdrawal. The same chair where I'd canceled all those automatic payments. Everything that had happened in the past 2 weeks had started from this chair. "I haven't seen it," I said. Carol Cooper posted it to the neighborhood Facebook group. It spread from there. People are sharing it, commenting, "Lester, they're not kind to Griffin." "What are they saying?" Vernon was quiet for a moment. "They're calling it elder abuse. They're talking about the fact that you had a bandage on your head, that you were using a cane, that he did it in front of his daughter. And that line you said at the end, people keep quoting it. You just hit the only person still paying for your life." They're asking what that means. I didn't watch the video. I already knew what was on it. I had lived it. "Some people are figuring it out," Vernon continued, "putting together the repo truck and the frozen credit and what you said. Curtis has been telling people what he knows, about the hospital, about Griffin not calling, about everything." "I don't need to watch it, Vernon," I said. "I know, I just thought you should know it's out there." "How many people have seen it?" 3,400 as of an hour ago, and that's just in our neighborhood group. People are sharing it to other groups. Maplewood Heights, Matthews Community Watch, Charlotte Small Business Owners. It's spreading. 847 comments. I could imagine what they said. Could picture neighbors who'd smiled and waved at Griffin for years, who'd hired him to renovate their kitchens and add sunrooms, who'd thought he was a successful businessman with a nice family. All of them watching that video and understanding who he really was. I thought about Griffin seeing those comments, reading them one by one. Strangers and neighbors and maybe even clients, all of them judging him for something he couldn't deny, because it was right there on video. No context that could excuse it. No explanation that could make it better. "Are you all right?" Vernon asked. "Yeah, I'm all right." "You sure you don't want to see it? Just to know what people are seeing." "I already lived it, Vernon. I don't need to watch it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "For what it's worth, the comments aren't sympathetic to him. People are on your side." "I don't need them to be on my side," I said. "I just needed to stop being under his foot." "Well, you accomplished that." After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a while. The video was out there now, spreading through the neighborhood like a wildfire I didn't need to tend. 3,400 views, 847 comments, and climbing probably while I sat there in my kitchen, thinking about how truth has its own momentum once you stop trying to control it. I didn't need to watch it. I didn't need to read the comments. I didn't need to see Griffin's world crumbling in real time through social media reactions. Everyone else already was. Curtis texted me on Friday morning.
"Your son just got the email." I didn't ask which one. I could guess it was the one that would hurt most. Curtis Hayes, 70, still lived next door to Griffin and kept his ear to the ground in that Matthews subdivision. When word traveled through those networks, it reached him first, and he made sure it reached me second. He called 10 minutes after the text.
Redstone Properties sent Griffin a cancellation notice this morning, Curtis said. Contract termination effective immediately. Redstone Properties, Griffin's largest client. 8 custom homes a year, every year, for the past 4 years. Steady, reliable revenue that accounted for roughly 40% of his annual income.
Did they say why? I asked, even though I knew.
The email wasn't business language, Curtis said. It was personal. They saw the video, Lester, and they don't work with people who treat their fathers that way. Those were the exact words.
I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast that morning. The same table where I'd decided 2 weeks ago to start dismantling Griffin's invisible supports.
My buddy at Redstone forwarded me a copy, Curtis continued. The managing partner wrote it himself. Usually their office manager handles contract stuff, but this came straight from the top. He wanted Griffin to know it was personal.
Has Griffin responded? Tried calling them 3 times this morning. They're not picking up.
We sat in silence for a moment. Curtis knew what this meant. 40% of Griffin's revenue gone with one email and a viral video.
You all right?
Curtis asked.
Yeah, I'm all right.
You don't sound all right.
I didn't want this, I said. I just wanted him to stand on his own.
I know. But sometimes standing on your own means falling first. After we hung up, I thought about Griffin in his office reading that email. The professional language stripped away. The business relationship dissolved. Not because of money or quality or scheduling conflicts, but because someone had seen who he really was and decided they didn't want to be associated with it.
How many people does it take to tell you you're wrong before you believe them?
The weekend brought more cancellations. Vernon called Saturday evening to tell me about the first one, a kitchen remodel Griffin was supposed to start Monday. The client sent a vague email about budget concerns and wanting to postpone indefinitely. Sunday morning, 2 more cancellations, both citing similar reasons that didn't quite add up to the truth.
They'd seen the video. They just didn't want to say it explicitly.
Sunday afternoon, Vernon called again. My friend Jack is on the board at Pinecrest Golf and Country Club, he said. They suspended Griffin's membership this morning. Pinecrest. Griffin had been a member for 5 years, played every Sunday morning when the weather was good, had lunch at the clubhouse after. It was where he went to network with other business owners and feel like he'd made it.
Did they give a reason?
I asked. Conduct unbecoming of club standards. That's the official language. But Jack said the vote was unanimous. 3 board members had seen the video. The other 4 heard about it from their wives. I thought about Griffin showing up next Sunday, out of habit, not knowing the membership had been revoked. Thought about him being turned away at the gate by the attendant who'd waved him through every week for 5 years. When's the last time you played golf there? Vernon asked.
Long time ago, I said.
Griffin invited me once, maybe 2 months before Margaret died. The memory came back clear and sharp. Spring afternoon, warm sun, the dogwoods blooming around the course. Griffin had called me out of nowhere and asked if I wanted to play 9 holes. No particular occasion, just asked. We'd played terribly, both of us. Margaret's illness was already getting worse, and we were both distracted, both trying not to talk about it. But on the 9th hole, Griffin's ball had landed in the sand trap, and when he tried to chip out, he'd hit it so badly it went backward. And we'd both just laughed. Real laughter, the kind that comes from recognizing the absurdity of trying to control things you can't control. It was one of the last good days we'd had together. Margaret would have been furious with him. Not with me, with Griffin. She would have seen the belt incident and the neglect and the taking for granted, and she would have been the first one to tell him he'd thrown away something irreplaceable. She'd always been better at holding him accountable than I was, better at drawing lines and keeping them. Maybe if she'd lived longer, things would have been different. Or maybe Griffin would have treated her the same way eventually, and I would have watched that, too helpless and enabling, until it was too late to stop. You still there? Vernon asked. Yeah, just
thinking. About the fact that I can remember the good days now, without them changing anything. They happened. They were real. But they don't erase what came after. Vernon was quiet for a moment. That's growth, Lester. Or just exhaustion. Sometimes they're the same thing. After I hung up with Vernon, I sat in my living room and added up what Griffin had lost in 72 hours. Redstone Properties, 40% of his annual revenue. 3 smaller clients, probably another 15% combined. His golf club membership, the place where he'd networked and built relationships and felt like he belonged to something. And that was just what I knew about. There were probably other losses Vernon and Curtis hadn't heard about yet. Other clients quietly backing away. Other invitations that would stop coming. Other doors closing so softly Griffin might not even notice until he tried to walk through them and found them locked. By Monday morning, Griffin had lost 40% of his income, his social standing, and the place where he used to spend Sunday mornings. I wondered if he was counting the cost yet, or if he was still blaming everyone but himself. Still thinking this was something that had been done to him instead of something he'd built with his own hands, one careless cruelty at a time. Vernon called Tuesday morning to tell me Tom Hendricks had quit. Tom Hendricks, 58 years old, senior craftsman, quiet man who valued integrity over paychecks. He'd worked for me for 11 years before I sold the company. When Griffin took over, Tom had stayed on. I'd always wondered if that was loyalty to me or just inertia. Now I had my answer. He walked into the job site Monday morning, Vernon said. Renovation on Providence Road. Took off his work gloves real deliberate-like and set them on the sawhorses. Griffin was there, going over the schedule with the other guys. I could picture it. The half-finished kitchen. The smell of sawdust and paint primer. Tom standing there with his gloves in his hands, having already made his decision before he arrived. What did he say? I asked. Vernon paused. He said, "Worked for your father 11 years. He's a good man. Can't work for someone who treats a good man like that." I sat down at my kitchen table. Then he shook Griffin's hand, Vernon continued. Polite, professional. Said he was sorry, but he was done. Got in his truck and drove away. Left Griffin standing there in the middle of all those half-finished cabinets. Who told you this? Tom called me yesterday. Wanted me to know he'd done it. Wanted me to tell you. How do you measure the value of a man's character? Tom Hendricks had walked away from steady employment in a tough economy because he'd seen a video of a son hitting his father and couldn't live with taking money from that son anymore. He hadn't made a scene, hadn't tried to punish Griffin or make a statement. He'd just quietly chosen honor over his paycheck and walked away. Did Griffin say anything? I asked. Tom said Griffin tried to argue at first, said it wasn't what it looked like, that there was context people didn't understand. But Tom just shook his head and left. After Vernon hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about Tom. About the fact that he'd remembered working for me. That 11 years later, he still considered me a good man worth defending. I hadn't asked him to quit, hadn't even known he was considering it. But he'd done it anyway because sometimes people surprise you with their capacity for loyalty to something bigger than their own convenience. Wednesday evening, I got a text from Curtis. Just one line. "You should know, Lorraine found something tonight." I called him immediately. "Found what?" "The emails," Curtis said. She was looking for an insurance document on Griffin's laptop. Found the email thread from October 15th. The neighbor who saw the ambulance. The hospital notification. Both of them marked red. My hand tightened on the phone. "She knows he saw them," Curtis continued. "Knows he was in Asheville when they came through. My wife talked to her neighbor, who talked to Lorraine's sister. Word gets around. Before I tell you what Lorraine found in those emails, are you still with me? Comment A if you think this was ignorance. B if you think it was deliberate neglect. Add one reason why. Quick note, the next part includes some recreated details for emotional impact. What matters is the lesson behind it. I learned the details later, pieced together from what people told me. How Lorraine had been searching for the insurance renewal notice because their coverage was about to lapse.
How she'd opened Griffin's laptop and gone to his email, searching for correspondence from the insurance company. How she'd found the folder labeled October 2023 instead. The first email was from a neighbor. Subject line, "Your father, ambulance at residence." Sent at 4:47 p.m. on October 15th. The day I fell. The day I lay on that kitchen floor for 8 hours. The neighbor had written, "Saw ambulance at your dad's place this afternoon, around 4. Paramedics took him out on stretcher. Thought you should know." Marked red. October 15th, 6:52 p.m. The second email was from the hospital. Subject, emergency contact notification, Lester Bennett. Sent at 6:15 p.m. Standard automated message informing next of kin that I'd been admitted, providing the room number and visiting hours. Marked red. October 15th, 7:23 p.m. Read October 15th, 2023, 7:23 p.m. 17 minutes after the hospital sent it. Griffin had been at dinner in Asheville when he opened that email. Lorraine had been sitting across from him, probably talking about what they'd do the next day, which trails to hike, whether to check out that pottery place she'd seen online. And Griffin had opened an email saying his father had been taken to the hospital by ambulance, read it, and set his phone down and ordered dessert. I don't know how long Lorraine sat there looking at those timestamps. Curtis's wife's friend said she closed the laptop and sat on the edge of the bed for over an hour. Just sat there, in the bedroom of the house my monthly payments had been covering, looking at the wall. When Griffin came home that night, she didn't say anything. Didn't ask about the emails, didn't confront him. She already knew everything she needed to know. The man she'd married, the father of her child, the person she'd built a life with for 8 years. He'd gotten an email saying his father was in the hospital, and he'd chosen room service over a phone call. Chosen vacation over checking if I was all right. Chosen convenience over basic human decency. And she'd sat there, holding that knowledge alone, the same way I'd lain on that kitchen floor alone, and understood exactly who she'd been living with all this time. Lorraine sat on the edge of their bed, laptop closed beside her, looking at the bedroom door like it belonged to a stranger's house. When Griffin came home, she wouldn't ask him about the emails. She already knew everything she needed to know. Saturday afternoon felt like the first normal thing in weeks. Wren knocked on my door, holding a math book she didn't need help with. Lorraine might have been sitting with her discovery 3 days ago, holding knowledge that would eventually explode her marriage. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that Wren Cooper, the 11-year-old who'd saved my life, was standing at my door on a Saturday afternoon, looking for an excuse to check on me. "I have math homework," she said, holding up the textbook. "Can you help?" I looked at her for a moment. Smart girl. Perceptive. She knew I knew she didn't need help with 7th grade algebra. "Come in," I said. We sat in the backyard, even though November had turned cold. I made hot milk the way Margaret used to make it for me, warmed on the stove, not the microwave, with just a touch of vanilla. Max settled on the grass between our chairs, content to have company. The leaves were falling from the oak tree that hung over the fence, brown and gold and rust-colored drifting down in the afternoon light. The air smelled like wood smoke from someone's fireplace and the particular dampness that comes before winter. Wren didn't open the math book. "Are you okay, Mr. Bennett?" she asked instead. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and thought about how to answer that. "I think I will be," I said. She nodded, took a sip of her milk. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the leaves fall. "Are you angry at your son?" she finally asked. Smart girl. Perceptive. "Not anymore," I said. "Just sad for him." "Why sad?" "Because he's losing things he didn't know how to value until they were gone." Wren thought about that. Like you, like a lot of things. Me, his wife's respect, his daughter's certainty that her father is a good man, his own sense of who he is. "Do you think he'll figure it out?" "I don't know. Some people do. Some people just keep blaming everyone else." November takes everything down to the bones. Trees, gardens, relationships. We sat there until our milk was gone and the afternoon light started to fade. Ren finally opened her math book and showed me a problem she actually did need help with. Something about quadratic equations that I had to think about for a minute before I remembered how to solve. When she left, she hugged me at the door, quick and fierce. "I'm glad you're okay," she said. "Thank you for that day," I said. "For calling 911. I just did what anybody would do." "No," I said. "You did what you should do. There's a difference." Tuesday evening, Griffin knocked on my door. I heard it from the kitchen where I was making dinner. 3 knocks. Not aggressive, almost hesitant. I set down the knife I'd been using to cut vegetables and walked to the door. Looked through the peephole. Griffin stood in the hallway holding a paper bag. Takeout from somewhere. His face looked thinner than I remembered. Tired. The kind of tired that comes from not sleeping well for weeks. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the doorknob, watching him through the small glass circle. He knocked again. I unlocked the door, but left the chain on, opened it 6 inches. "Dad," Griffin said, "I just want to talk." He was looking at me through the gap in the door. Not angry, not demanding, just diminished. Like someone had let the air out of him. "You should go home, Griffin," I said. My voice came out calm, steady, not cruel, but not warm either. "I don't have a home right now," he said. I looked at the takeout bag in his hand. Probably from that Chinese place he used to like on Wendover Road. He'd brought food like that would make a difference. Like we could sit at my kitchen table and eat spring rolls, and everything would go back to how it was. Except there was no how it was to go back to. There was only what had always been, finally visible. "Then figure that out," I said. "Dad, please. I know I'm not ready to talk to you, Griffin. When will you be ready?" "I don't know. Maybe never. Maybe someday. But not tonight." He stood there in the hallway, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. Thought he might finally break down and show me something real instead of the performed grief I'd seen so many times before. But he just nodded. Set the takeout bag down on the floor outside my door. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it." I didn't slam the door. I just closed it. Slowly. Deliberately. The latch clicking into place with a sound that felt final. I stood on my side of the door, listening to Griffin's footsteps fade down the hallway. Heard the exterior door open and close. Heard a car engine start in the parking lot. Max came and sat beside me, pressing against my leg the way he did when he sensed I needed something steady. No regret. No satisfaction. Just the sound of my own breathing and the weight of a choice I'd made. I'd spent 6 years holding doors open for Griffin, literal and metaphorical, making sure he always had a way back in, a way to avoid consequences, a safety net he never saw because I'd made it invisible. This was the first door I'd closed. Not slammed, not locked forever necessarily, just closed. For now. Until I was ready. If I was ever ready. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up the knife and finished cutting the vegetables for dinner. Made myself a plate. Ate it at the table alone with Max at my feet. The takeout bag sat in the hallway for 3 days before maintenance took it away. I never opened my door to bring it in, never looked to see what Griffin had brought. It didn't matter what was in the bag. What mattered was that I'd closed the door and meant it. I wasn't sure if that made me stronger or just older. Maybe there wasn't a difference. Maybe wisdom and exhaustion were just 2 names for the same lesson, learned too late to change anything except yourself. Lorraine didn't tell me this part until much later, but the credit card declined on Sunday afternoon, $43 at the grocery store, standing behind a woman with 2 kids, waiting. I'd closed the door on Griffin Tuesday night, stood there listening to his footsteps fade, and wondered if that made me stronger or just older. I didn't know that the same week his wife was about to discover something that would make my closed door seem like the smallest consequence of all. The card reader had beeped. Declined. Lorraine tried it again. Declined. The cashier looked sympathetic, but tired. The woman behind her with the two kids shifted her weight and checked her phone. Lorraine paid cash and drove home and didn't say anything to Griffin about it. Not yet. She wanted to understand first. Monday morning, Griffin left early for a job site. Lorraine waited until she heard his car pull out of the driveway, then went to the home office and pulled out every financial document they had. Bank statements, credit card bills, insurance policies. The household budget spreadsheet Griffin said he maintained but rarely updated. She spread it all across the kitchen table, the way someone would spread evidence at a crime scene. Because that's what it felt like, she told me later. Like collecting proof of something she'd suspected but never quite believed. The monthly deposits came first. $2,140, transferred on the first of every month from an account labeled LHB Trust. She'd seen those deposits for years, had assumed it was some kind of business account or investment return. Griffin had never explained it, and she'd never asked. She opened the online banking portal and traced the account. The name on it was clear: Lester H. Bennett, trustee. My name, my middle initial, my trust account that I'd set up when Margaret died to manage what was left of our savings. Every piece of financial stability in their life, mortgage insurance, utilities, came from the father Griffin had publicly humiliated. Lorraine sat back in her chair and looked at 6 years of monthly transfers. 72 deposits, $154,080. She pulled the health insurance policy next. Family coverage through my retiree benefits. I'd added them 6 years ago when Griffin said the premiums through his small business were too expensive. The monthly cost was automatically deducted from my pension. $380 per month times 72 months. $27,360 every month for 6 years. The credit card statements were in a folder labeled personal. She opened them and started going through the charges. Most were routine: gas, groceries, the occasional dinner out. But one jumped out. October 15th, 2023. Asheville Grove Resort, $847.30. The vacation they'd taken. The anniversary trip Griffin had insisted on, even though money was tight. The hotel where they'd stayed 3 nights, eaten at nice restaurants, browsed the art galleries. She clicked on the account details. The cardholder name, Lester H. Bennett. Lorraine told me later that she sat there staring at that charge for 10 full minutes. October 15th. The day I'd fallen in my kitchen. The day the ambulance had come. The day I'd lain on that floor for 8 hours while they were eating dinner at a restaurant I'd paid for. She opened her laptop and pulled up Griffin's email. She knew his password. Had known it for years. Found the thread from October 15th. The neighbor's message about the ambulance at 4:47 p.m. The hospital notification at 6:15 p.m. Both marked red. Both opened while they were in Asheville. Both ignored. And the bill for the hotel, the meals, the entire trip, all of it, charged to my account. She told me she put her head down on the table and stayed there until the numbers blurred. The man her husband had hit with a belt in front of 8 neighbors. The man she'd filmed and uploaded to Facebook. The man who'd been hospitalized 3 days before that video. The man Griffin had stood over and struck while he was still healing from a fall that nearly killed him. That man had been paying for their lives. Quietly, invisibly, for 6 years. The mortgage they thought Griffin's successful business covered. The health insurance they thought they couldn't afford otherwise. The vacation they thought was a splurge, but manageable. The monthly cushion that made the difference between comfortable and struggling. All of it. Every bit of stability they'd had. From me. Lorraine gathered the papers into a pile. Statements, policies, spreadsheets. The evidence of 6 years of support Griffin had never mentioned, had never acknowledged, had maybe never even fully understood. Because he'd set up the automatic transfers and then stopped looking at where the money came from. She thought about the belt video, about posting it to Facebook, about the caption she'd written. This happened Saturday. Man being hit is 67, just released from hospital. She'd meant it as exposure, as justice, as showing people who Griffin really was. But she hadn't known
hadn't understood, hadn't asked the right questions. The man being hit was 67 years old, just released from the hospital, and he'd been paying their mortgage while they ignored the notification that he'd been admitted.
Lorraine sat surrounded by papers that told a story Griffin never had. Payment states, account numbers that spelled out exactly who had been holding their lives together while Griffin pretended to. She'd filmed him hitting the man who paid for everything, uploaded it for strangers to judge, and never once asked who was actually taking care of whom.
The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock Margaret had given them as a wedding gift.
The morning sun came through the window and lit up all those papers on the table. Evidence, proof, truth. When Griffin came home that evening, Lorraine had put all the papers away, back in their folders, back in their files, everything exactly where it had been.
She made dinner, set the table, asked about his day, and said nothing about what she'd learned. Because some knowledge changes you before you're ready to act on it. Some truths need time to settle before you can figure out what to do with them. She knew now, knew everything. Knew about the money, and the emails, and the vacation, and the hospital, and the belt, and all of it. Griffin didn't know she knew. And that difference, that gap between what he thought she understood and what she actually did, was a crack that would eventually break everything open. The envelope was small, addressed in purple crayon with careful capital letters that didn't quite stay on the line. Lorraine had discovered the truth Monday. By Wednesday, she still hadn't said anything to Griffin. The crack between what he thought she knew and what she actually did was widening silently. And I didn't know about any of it yet. All I knew was that an envelope had arrived in my mailbox with my granddaughter's handwriting. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Looked at it for a moment before opening it. The return address just said Ivy in the top left corner. No last name. Like she was already famous enough to need only one. Inside was a single piece of paper. Construction paper, light blue. A crayon drawing done with the careful concentration of an 8-year-old who wants to get it right. Me in my chair. I could tell it was supposed to be me because she'd drawn the cane leaning against the armrest. Max at my feet, recognizable by the floppy ears and the tail that took up half the page. Yellow flowers all around us. Daisies probably, though they looked more like suns with petals. In the top right corner, in that same careful purple crayon, I love you, Grandpa. In the bottom left, I'm sorry. I sat down at the table holding that piece of construction paper, and for the first time since this whole thing started, since the fall, since the hospital, since the belt, since everything, I cried. Not from pain, not from anger or grief or exhaustion, because an 8-year-old understood something the adults had failed to grasp, that apology is enough to begin. That you don't need explanations or excuses or perfect words, just honest recognition of hurt and a wish that it wasn't there. Ivy hadn't done anything wrong. But she'd seen her father hit her grandfather, and she'd said she was sorry anyway. Sorry for witnessing it. Sorry for whatever part she thought she'd played just by being there. Sorry that the world had adults in it who did things like that. I put the drawing on my refrigerator next to the photo of Margaret and me at the beach from our last vacation together. 2 things that mattered. 2 reminders of love that existed without conditions. Children understand forgiveness in ways we forget as we age. It's simple, immediate, without the weight of pride. Curtis called me the following week. Early December, the first really cold day of the season. Lester, I need to show you something, he said. Don't shoot the messenger. What is it? I'm sending you a link. Just look at it and then call me back. The link came through a minute later. Facebook Marketplace. Listing from Charlotte posted 2 hours ago. Men's dress watch. Excellent condition. Classic style leather band works perfectly. $340 OBO. Serious inquiries only. The photo showed the watch laid out on what looked like a kitchen counter. I recognized it immediately. The silver face, the Roman numerals, the small scratch on the crystal at the 2 o'clock position.
from when Griffin had knocked it against a car door years ago. I'd given him that watch on his wedding day, 22 years ago. Margaret and I had shopped for it together, spent more than we could really afford because we wanted it to be special. Wanted him to have something that would last, something he could pass down someday. $800 in 2001, $340 on the internet in 2023. I called Curtis back. That's the one I gave him at his wedding, I said. I thought so. I remembered seeing it on him at your retirement party. I'm sorry, Lester. Don't be. It's his to sell. Still. I sat there looking at the listing on my phone, read through the description again. Excellent condition, works perfectly, serious inquiries only. No mention that it was a wedding gift from his father. No story about where it came from or what it meant. Just an object to be converted to cash to cover debts he'd accumulated, gambling on things that didn't matter. Vernon called me later that same day. He'd seen it too. Curtis told me about the watch, Vernon said. You doing okay? Yeah, I'm fine. That's the one Margaret helped you pick out. Yeah. He's selling other stuff too, from what I hear. TV, furniture, whatever he can get cash for quickly. The gambling debt. $47,000 that Desmond had told me about. Griffin was selling everything he owned to cover it. The business was gone. The truck was gone. The clients were gone. Now he was selling the furniture and the watch and anything else that could be turned into money. 22 years on his wrist. $340 on the internet. Do you want me to buy it? Vernon asked. I could grab it before someone else does. Get it back for you. I thought about that. About Vernon buying the watch from Griffin. About it coming back to me through some circuitous route. About having it sitting in a drawer somewhere. A reminder of everything that had been lost. No, I said. Let someone else have it. Someone who'll keep it. You're sure? I'm sure. After I hung up, I thought about all the things Griffin had sold or lost in the past 2 months. The truck, the clients, the employees, the golf club membership, the watch, the furniture, the business, the respect of his neighbors. All of it could be converted to dollars and cents. All of it could be listed on the internet and sold to the highest bidder. But the only thing that couldn't be sold or recovered was the one thing Griffin had thrown away first. The one thing that had held all of it together. The one thing that no amount of money could buy back once you'd broken it. And it wasn't made of gold or leather or any material you could photograph and post online. It was trust. It was relationship. It was the certainty that someone would be there when you needed them because they'd always been there before. Griffin had sold the watch for $340 to cover gambling debts, but he'd thrown away something worth infinitely more for free. And that was the part he still didn't understand. Vernon called me the second Friday of December to tell me Lorraine had left. She's gone, he said when I answered. Curtis's wife saw her loading suitcases into an Uber this afternoon. Ivy was with her. I sat down slowly. I pieced the rest together later from people who'd heard it, from people who knew. Lorraine had been packing quietly for a week while Griffin was out trying to salvage what remained of his business. She'd called the Uber for 3 o'clock, knowing he'd be gone. Griffin came home at 4:15 to find her standing in the living room with her coat on. Ivy, small and quiet, beside her. "Where are you going?" he asked. Lorraine looked at him, the man she'd married 8 years ago, the father of her daughter, the person she'd built a life with in a house my money had been quietly paying for. "I married you because I thought you were like your father," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, not angry, just done. I was wrong. I should have seen it a long time ago. 8 years of marriage. 23 words to end it. Ivy hugged Griffin long and tight, the way children do when they're trying to memorize something they're afraid they'll forget. Then Lorraine picked up her suitcase and walked to the door. Ivy followed, looking back once at her father standing in the doorway of a house about to be foreclosed on. The Uber pulled away. Griffin watched until it turned the corner and disappeared. That was the ultimate irony of his fall. Losing the woman who'd seen his father's worth all along, who'd married him believing he possessed that same character, and who discovered too late she'd been wrong about which man he was. After Vernon hung up, I sat thinking about Thanksgiving the week before, just me and Max. Last year, the table had been full. Griffin, Lorraine, Ivy, and me, all pretending Margaret's empty chair wasn't empty. This year, it was one plate, one glass of wine, and a turkey too big for one person that I'd cooked anyway. It wasn't sad the way I'd expected. It was quiet. Honest. Vernon had knocked around 6 with a bottle of red wine. We watched old football games without talking much, the comfortable silence of two men who'd known each other long enough that words were optional. After he left, I looked at Ivy's drawing on the refrigerator. The crayon. Grandfather. The crayon dog. The yellow flowers. I love you, Grandpa. I'm sorry. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote to Margaret. I'd been doing this since she died, folding letters and placing them in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't believe she could read them, but writing to her made my thoughts feel less like they were rattling around with nowhere to go. I told her about Griffin's fall, about the hospital and the belt and the business collapsing, about closing the door on him the first time in 6 years I'd said no and meant it, about Thanksgiving dinner for one that hadn't felt like punishment. 4 pages, front and back. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the others, a record of grief becoming something quieter, something I could live with. The apartment didn't feel empty when I closed the drawer. It felt like something I was still part of. Griffin had lost everything now. His business, his truck, his reputation, his furniture, his watch, his wife, his daughter. All of it. Gone. The question wasn't whether he'd hit bottom. He had. The question was whether he'd finally understand what he'd thrown away, and whether understanding would be enough. The second knock came 3 days after Lorraine left, softer than the first time, like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. It was Monday evening, December 11th, after 9 o'clock. Light rain had been falling since dinner. I was reading in my chair, Max asleep at my feet, when I heard 3 quiet taps on my door. I looked through the peephole. Griffin stood in the hallway, wet from the rain. No expensive jacket, just a cheap windbreaker that wasn't keeping him dry. No truck waiting outside. No watch on his wrist. No facade left to maintain. Just a 46-year-old man at his father's door. I opened it completely. No chain this time. He stood there looking at me, opened his mouth, and said nothing. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside and dripped rainwater onto the floor. I handed him a towel. He dried his face without speaking. We went to the living room. I sat in my chair. Griffin sat on the sofa across from me. Max stretched and settled on the floor between us, equidistant like Switzerland. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Griffin started talking. Not with an apology, not with excuses. Just with facts. The company's closing. I can't make payroll. The bank called the credit line due. $793,000 in 30 days. I know, I said. He looked up. You knew. I was the guarantor. They notified me when they froze the line. Griffin leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, staring at the floor. Lorraine left, he said. Took Ivy, Friday. I came home and they were gone. She said she married me because she thought I was like you. Then she said she was wrong about who I was. I said nothing. I'm $47,000 in debt, he continued. Gambling. Borrowed from Turner Supply 6 months ago. They want it back. I know about that too, I said. Desmond told me. When I withdrew the guarantee, Griffin went still. You withdrew it? You're the one who pulled the credit line? Yes. Why? Because you hit me with a belt in front of 8 neighbors. Because you knew I was in the hospital and didn't call. Because I spent 6 years holding you up while you pretended you were standing on your own. He put his head in his hands. I knew you were in the hospital, he said, voice muffled. Got the email. Didn't come. Tell me what happened. He lifted his head. We were at dinner in Asheville. The notification came through emergency contact. I read it, set my phone down and ordered dessert. Lorraine asked what the email was. I told her it was work. We finished dinner, went back to the hotel, stayed the whole weekend.
Did you think about calling Sunday morning? But I figured you had it handled. You always had it handled. And we'd already paid for the hotel. He paused. The hotel you paid for. The vacation you paid for. The house Lorraine just left, you paid for. The truck they repossessed, the insurance, the monthly cushion that kept us afloat. All of it. I didn't know the full picture until Lorraine laid the bank statements on the kitchen table the day before she left, and made me look. The rain picked up outside, drumming against the windows. "Why are you here tonight?" I asked. "I need money," Griffin said. $47,000. Turner Supply is threatening to sue.
There it was.
Not reconciliation, not forgiveness. Money.
I know, I said. Are you going to help me?
I don't know yet, but I needed you to tell me the truth first. About the hospital, about the money, about why you're really sitting in my living room. Griffin leaned back against the sofa. He looked hollowed out, like a man who'd been carrying something too heavy for too long, and had finally set it down not because he'd grown strong enough, but because his arms had given out. I knew that feeling. I'd been carrying him for 46 years. "I don't know how to fix any of this," he said quietly. "I know you don't," I said. "That's why you're here." At 6:43 on Tuesday evening, I arranged 3 objects on my coffee table, like evidence at trial. A 90-day gambling recovery enrollment form with Griffin's name already filled in. A business card from Desmond Lancaster, the financial advisor Vernon had recommended. And the leather belt from my kitchen floor, the one I'd thrown 46 years ago, still creased where it had landed. Griffin was due at 7. I'd called him that afternoon with 4 words, "Come to my apartment." He'd hesitated. I'd said 7 o'clock and hung up. Now I sat in Margaret's chair and studied the arrangement. The form represented choice. The card represented structure. The belt represented everything we'd carried for 46 years. The knock came at 6:58. Griffin stood in my hallway, looking like he'd aged a decade since Vernon's house. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes belonged to a man who'd stopped sleeping. "Come in," I said. He walked to the sofa, but didn't sit. His gaze moved across the coffee table, the form, the card, the belt processing, each one. "What is this?" "A choice." I stood and moved to the other side of the table, putting the arrangement between us. "I've spent a week thinking about what your mother would have done if she were here. She would have fought for you." I picked up the belt. Old leather, familiar weight. This belt ended our relationship as father and son. Your choice tonight will decide whether it opens a new life or closes it. "You kept it," he said quietly. "Your mother kept it. I found it after she died, in a box with your baby shoes and kindergarten drawings." I set it down. She never stopped believing you'd come home. Something broke in his face. I picked up the enrollment form. 90-day residential program in Bakersfield, opening on Monday. It's covered. I set it down and held up Desmond's card. "This advisor will restructure your debt if you complete the 90 days. I'll co-sign a payment plan if you complete the 90 days. Griffin's hands were shaking. "And if I don't?" "Then you'll face Caruso alone." The silence stretched between us. Traffic hummed outside. A siren passed. The refrigerator clicked on. "Why now?" he asked. "After 46 years. Because your mother spent 46 years carrying both of us," I said. "And she's not here anymore." I walked to my door and opened it. Stood there, with my hand on the knob. "You can walk out. Take your chances with Caruso, with the gambling, with all of it. I won't stop you." I let the open doorway speak for itself. "Or you can choose differently." For a moment I thought he'd bolt. Then he moved, not toward the door, but toward the coffee table. He picked up the enrollment form with both hands, tracing the lines where I'd written his name, his birth date, my number as emergency contact. "I don't know if I can do 90 days, he whispered. "Neither do I. But your mother believed you could, and she was right.
About most things.
He looked at the open door, at the form, at me.
Then he stepped past me, not into the hallway, but into my kitchen, into my home.
I closed the door.
There's coffee, I said. Sofa's made up. We'll call the program in the morning. We sat at my kitchen table and drank coffee in silence. Not the silence of strangers, but of two men who'd run out of words decades ago and were learning to exist without them. Around 11, Griffin fell asleep on my sofa. I covered him with Margaret's blue afghan, the one she'd crocheted during her first chemotherapy.
Wednesday morning, I called Desmond.
Griffin's made his choice. He'll enter the program Monday.
Good, Desmond said.
But my involvement is conditional on completion. Same goes for your co-signing.
Same terms, I said.
I hung up and looked at Griffin, still sleeping, clutching Margaret's afghan. The enrollment form sat on the coffee table, unsigned but chosen. The belt beside it no longer a weapon.
Some debts take 46 years to acknowledge.
Some take 90 days to begin paying. Margaret had kept our door open for 46 years, while I'd kept it closed.
It was time I learned how. 35 days into Griffin's 90-day program, the phone rang on a Monday morning.
Vernon was at my kitchen table with his coffee, Max asleep in his patch of January sun. The enrollment form sat on my desk, beside Ivy's drawing and Margaret's photo, where it had been since November.
Mr. Bennett.
The voice was professional, measured. This is Sarah Keller from Bakersfield Recovery Center. Routine update on Griffin Bennett. He's attending every session, engaging with the work. His counselor wanted you to know he's progressing well. He's also sent a letter. Through the program should arrive in a few days.
I thanked her. She said they'd call again at day 60 and hung up.
Vernon was watching me. Good news. I thought about driving Griffin to Bakersfield, watching him walk through those doors. 34 days of silence after.
Early news, I said. Vernon picked up his coffee.
That's a start. We both knew what we weren't saying, that 35 days was only the beginning, that 55 more stretched ahead, that finishing the program was one thing and staying clean afterward was another entirely. But early news was still news. The letter arrived Thursday. Thin envelope, Bakersfield return address. I carried it upstairs, walked Max first because I wasn't ready, then sat by the window where the light was good. 4 handwritten pages. Griffin's careful block letters. He wrote about the program, the sessions, the other men there. He wrote about missing Margaret, specific things, the way she hummed while cooking, her terrible knock-knock jokes, how she'd believed, right until the cancer took her, that he and I were more alike than we knew. Mom used to say we were both stubborn, he wrote. Both carried everything alone. Both thought strength meant never bending. Maybe that's why we broke each other so easily. We were made of the same rigid material. He didn't ask for forgiveness, made no promises. He just wrote, I want to be the kind of man Mom thought I could be. I don't know if I can, but I'm trying. I set the letter down and looked at Margaret's photo. Her smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. He's trying, I whispered. Saturday afternoon, Wren knocked on my door, holding winter flowers from her mother's garden. Yellow blooms wrapped in newspaper. For you, Mr. Bennett, because you're okay. We sat outside in the thin January sun, Max between us with his head on Wren's shoe. She talked about a math test, a birthday party, a book she was reading. I listened, sometimes smiled. She'd saved my life twice. Once in October, calling 911 when she'd found me on the kitchen floor, and once in January, bringing flowers that reminded me the world still offered small kindnesses. After she left, I stood in my apartment, looking at what I had. Winter flowers, Griffin's letter, Margaret's photo, Max in his sun patch. Griffin had 55 days left. I had no guarantees about what came after, no answers to questions that had broken us decades ago. But I had a Saturday afternoon, a letter that said, I'm trying, and the understanding that trying was enough to start with. You don't get the life you planned. You get the one you're willing to build from what remains. I made dinner, fed Max, watered Wren's flowers.
read Griffin's letter once more before folding it carefully into the folder. Outside, Charlotte settled into evening. Somewhere in Bakersfield, my son was 35 days into becoming someone neither of us knew yet. The story didn't end. It just became ordinary again, which was its own kind of grace. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't about winning. They're about choosing what kind of person you want to be when the fight is over. Don't make my mistake of waiting 46 years to open a door that should never have been closed. I let pride build a wall between me and my son, and it took losing Margaret to realize that some debts, the ones we owe to the people we love, can't be paid back, only carried forward. I wasted decades when I could have been walking toward forgiveness instead of away from it. Family justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's about setting boundaries that force the people you love to face themselves. This isn't like other dads' revenge stories where I destroyed my son. Real family justice meant giving Griffin a choice, redemption or ruin. I believe God put me through this pain so I could learn that strength isn't holding grudges. It's holding space for people to change. These dad's revenge stories you hear often end with total victory. Mine ends with uncertainty, with 55 days still ahead, with hope instead of guarantees. And that's the truest kind of family justice I know. If my story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a comment telling me what you think about the choice I made. Should I have offered Griffin that second chance? Or should family justice sometimes mean walking away completely? Please share this with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Wise Revenge for more dad's revenge stories like this one. Thank you for staying until the very end. Some details in this story have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes, but the lesson that real strength sometimes looks like mercy is as real as it gets.